Hi, everybody. My name is Cassidy Mata, and today for my section 4 book, I will be presenting on James and the Giant Peach, written by Roald Dahl. So, getting into the summary portion of the book, James and the Giant Peach is a children's novel about a young boy named James Henry Trotter, and James lost his parents in an accident. And James is forced to end up living with his two cruel aunts, and his aunts' names are Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker. And they have always been very mean to James, making him do things that he does not want to do, and overall just treated him very poorly. One day, James ended up encountering a mysterious man who gives him magical green crystals. And by accident, James spills them near a peach tree where an enormous peach ends up beginning to grow. And then he notices it's just getting bigger and bigger until finally he notices a hidden entrance inside of the peach. And he ends up going inside the entrance. And when he enters the peach, he is met by these human sized, very oversized talking insects, which included a grasshopper, a ladybug, a centipede, a spider, an earthworm, and a glowworm. So eventually, the peach breaks off of the tree and ends up rolling away. And then eventually, they start beginning this journey across land and sea. And then along the way, James and his friends face different challenges such as shark attacks and sky pirates. And while they are traveling inside the peach. And then eventually the peach ends up landing in New York City at the towards the end of the book where James becomes eventually a hero and James finds a new family within his insect friends and finally experiences the happiness and love that he always longed for after his parents passed away. So getting into the visuals of the book. So although it was a longer book, there were a few visuals that would pop up every few pages. So the main things that were seen were the peach, obviously, and the peach was obviously a peach color, very orange, very bright, and it ended up as a very small peach, but once the crystals had dropped, it made it grow a lot bigger, and then it ended up being this huge, gigantic peach that eventually James was able to walk inside. It grew on a tree, as we know, and then it did glow, and it was soft and fuzzy. So that is shown right here. That's as big as the peach was. So it was very, very big. And then, so getting into the insects, so as we talked about, there were different insects and they were human sized, they were very, very big. So when James had first walked in, he was actually a little bit frightened because of how big they were, as a young boy would. So getting into the characters and what they looked like. So the centipede had boots on his feet, so he wore boots on his feet. Grasshopper was green and it actually had like a green, like kind of like a clear exoskeleton like figure. The earthworm was blind, it was pink, and it was slimy. That is shown several and described several times throughout the story. And then there was glowworm and he lights up. And then there's Miss Spider. She is pretty much just described to have long legs. And then the ladybug was round, black, and red with wings. So getting into the overall story, the setting was very whimsical. So obviously that we're getting into a fictional novel. So it was very dreamlike, magical, and adventurous. Um, it took us on an adventure for sure. So it started off with the peach being by the tree, and then we go to different settings, and eventually it ended up in New York City. So getting into the genre portion. So we know that this is a novel because of its length and size. It would not be considered a picture book. although it does have visuals in it, it is considered a novel. Um, and then also children's literature, and then obviously fantasy because we are talking about different creatures, and it is also fiction. And we know this because obviously there are no magic crystals that can make a peach grow that big. It may get pretty big, bigger than average, but realistically, it wouldn't get, big enough for somebody to step inside of it. And then we do hear about talking insects, and then we also talked about how the insects were human sized. So, which obviously can't be true. So that's how we know it is fantasy and fiction. And then it also takes us on crazy adventures that wouldn't happen in real life. So, getting into the quote. So, my favorite quote for this story from James and the Giant Peach actually comes from chapter 24, page 95, which is one of the insects saying, "There are a whole lot of things in this world of ours that you haven't wondered about yet." And then the insect was talking to James about this. And I really enjoyed this quote because it talks about how there's always adventure in life and that there's so many things that we don't know about that we will learn about. And then it just kind of discusses how life is an adventure. And although we might not know everything in the moment, and even though we want to know everything in the moment, life is about learning different things and wondering about different things. So I really, really like that quote. And that is why I chose it to be my favorite one. And then getting into the strengths and weaknesses of the book. So we'll start with the strengths. So, what I really liked about this book was that it was very creative. I've honestly never read James and the Giant Peach before. So, when I did read it, I thought it was like very different than any other stories that I have read before, because although it was a fantasy and fiction, it was very creative. Like, I never heard of a book that has like giant insects and then like a giant peach. I just thought it was very interesting. And then it also goes into having different themes that are also very strong, such as friendship. We learn about friendship, we learn about love, we learn about loyalty. And then also, it was very engaging. I feel like you kind of just wanted to figure out what was going to happen next and what James and his insect friends were going to do. And then also, I did find it to be very humorous. I know that is a little controversial, but I did find it to be very humorous, and I feel like a lot of children would find it humorous, and that is a way I found that it was very engaging for me. So, getting into the weaknesses. So, starting off, I guess some could say that the death of James's parents could be a little sensitive for some readers. I know that is a very, very small portion in the story, but it's kind of right off the bat at the beginning of the book. So, I feel like that could rub either children or parents just a little bit the wrong way. It is unrealistic, but then again, it is a fiction fantasy book. And then also, there was a lack of internal development when it came to James. I felt like it didn't really discuss like his feelings and how he got over certain things. It kind of just took us on an adventure to kind of distract him from that feeling. And then also, it did have a very simplistic plot to it. I guess some could say that there wasn't a lot of development throughout the story. And then getting into the classroom activity. So, the grade level that I would be doing would be fourth grade. So, that would be ages about 8 and 9. And then I would have them do a vocabulary worksheet that gets the students more familiar with the more complex vocabulary from throughout the book that they have not been introduced yet. And I feel like this way the students would get the book a lot more, because I know that throughout the story, although I did understand it, I know that some fourth graders are not introduced to such complex vocabulary yet. And I feel like if they were to do this worksheet, they would understand the book a lot more and what words they're saying. So, for example, we have, um, so for number one, very large in size, quantity, or extent would be enormous. And then, like for number 11, a foolish person, idiot, I probably would get rid of that last word, but would be like imbecile. And then, just have them, I would probably do one or two with them, and then they can help each other with the rest of the vocabulary. And if they still don't understand some of the words, we can reflect that back as a class and go over that if they do have any questions. And I feel like this way they are able to kind of communicate with each other and use comprehension skills, which I think would be very good for them. So that is my presentation on James and the Giant Peach. Thank you.